I still remember the exact moment I discovered the truth. There I was, sitting in my attorney's office on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, staring at bank statements that rewrote my entire family history. "These transfers total over $850,000, she said quietly. "All from your trust fund to your brother's company." My grandparents had left me that money for my education and future. My parents had been appointed as trustees until I turned 30. And now, 6 months before my 30th birthday, I discovered they had systematically drained it to prop up my brother's failing business ventures. But that betrayal was just the beginning. What the bank records truly revealed would change everything I thought I knew about my family, my future, and myself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The mahogany conference table in Patricia Winter's law office gleamed under soft, recessed lighting as she carefully arranged the documents before me. Outside, Chicago's financial district was being washed clean by an early spring downpour, the skyscrapers disappearing into low-hanging clouds. My reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows looked small and uncertain, out of place in this realm of corporate power. "Ms. Bennett, take your time reviewing these," Patricia said, sliding a thick folder across the polished surface. "They represent 5 years of transaction records from the Bennett Family Trust, of which you are the sole beneficiary." I nodded, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. At 29 years and 6 months old, I was finally taking control of my financial future. The trust my grandparents had established for me had always been a distant, abstract concept. Money I knew existed but had never seen or touched. My parents, as trustees, had managed it throughout my 20s, signing off on withdrawals for my college education and approving the down payment on my modest apartment 3 years ago. As we discussed in our previous meeting, Patricia continued, "Your grandparents' stipulation was that you would assume full control of the trust assets on your 30th birthday. Given that milestone is approaching, I suggested this review to prepare you for the transition." I smiled gratefully at Patricia. We'd connected through a women's professional networking event 6 months earlier, and her straightforward approach to financial literacy had immediately put me at ease. As a first-generation college graduate working in hospital administration, I'd always felt intimidated by the world of investments and trust funds. "I just want to understand what I'm walking into," I explained, opening the folder. "My parents always handled everything, and honestly, I've never been completely clear on what's even in the trust." Patricia nodded sympathetically. "That's perfectly understandable. Financial literacy isn't typically taught in schools, and many families don't discuss money matters openly. But knowledge is power, especially when it comes to your financial security." I began paging through the statements, my eyes scanning columns of numbers and transaction descriptions. Patricia had flagged certain pages with colored tabs, which I assumed highlighted important information. "The original trust was established with $1, $2 million when you were born," Patricia explained. "Your grandparents built a successful chain of hardware stores across the Midwest, as you know, and wanted to secure your future after they were gone." I nodded, remembering my grandfather's weathered hands and my grandmother's practical wisdom. They had passed away within months of each other when I was 12, leaving behind a legacy of hard work and careful planning. By the time you entered college, the trust had grown to approximately $1. $5 million through conservative investments, Patricia continued. The terms allowed for educational expenses and reasonable living costs, with the expectation that the majority would remain intact until you turned 30. My fingers froze on a page with a red tab. A withdrawal of $75,000 with the description, "Capital Investment, Pinnacle Tech Solutions." The date was 3 years ago. "What's this?" I asked, pointing to the entry. "I don't recognize this transaction." Patricia leaned forward, her expression carefully neutral. "That's one of the items I wanted to discuss. Pinnacle Tech Solutions is a company registered to your brother, Michael Bennett. I blinked, trying to process this information. Michael's company? Why would money from my trust fund go to his business? That's a question only your parents, as trustees, could answer definitively, Patricia replied. Legally, trustees have some discretion in managing trust assets, but they are bound by fiduciary duty to act in the beneficiary's best interest. An investment in a family member's business would be unusual, unless it could be clearly demonstrated to benefit you. A cold feeling began spreading through my chest as I flipped through more pages, now actively looking for similar transactions. They weren't difficult to find. Over the past 5 years, multiple transfers had been made from my trust to various entities connected to my brother: Pinnacle Tech Solutions, MJB Enterprises, Bennett Innovation Group. These transfers total over $850,000, Patricia said, quietly, confirming my growing horror. All from your trust fund to your brother's company. The room seemed to tilt slightly as the magnitude of what I was seeing hit me. Nearly 2/3 of my inheritance had been funneled into my brother's businesses without my knowledge or consent. Is this legal? I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Patricia chose her words carefully. It raises significant concerns about potential breach of fiduciary duty. Your parents were entrusted with managing these assets for your benefit. Without clear documentation showing how these investments were intended to benefit you, and without your informed consent, these transactions are highly problematic. Memories started flooding back: Michael's gleaming new offices in downtown Chicago that I'd visited last year, the luxury condo he'd purchased, the Tesla he drove. My brother, 5 years my senior at 34, had always been presented as the family's success story, the brilliant entrepreneur building a tech empire while I pursued a safe career in healthcare administration. Meanwhile, I lived in a small one-bedroom apartment, still had $40,000 in student loans despite the trust supposedly covering my education, and drove a 10-year-old Honda with failing air conditioning. There's more, Patricia said gently, turning to a blue-tabbed section. These records show quarterly payments from your brother's company to your parents, described as consulting fees, beginning shortly after the first major transfer from your trust. The implication was unmistakable. My parents had been receiving kickbacks from the money they'd diverted from my trust to my brother's business. I don't understand, I said, the words feeling inadequate for the magnitude of the betrayal unfolding before me. My parents aren't wealthy, but they're comfortable. Dad's dental practice has always done well, and Mom's interior design business has steady clients. Why would they? Why would they steal from me? Patricia closed the folder gently. People's financial situations aren't always what they appear, even to close family members. The 2008 recession hit many professionals hard, especially those near retirement with investments in the market. It's possible your parents experienced financial difficulties they concealed from you. I shook my head, struggling to reconcile this information with the parents I thought I knew, the ones who'd emphasized honesty and integrity throughout my childhood, who'd seemed proud of my dedication to helping others through my work at the Children's Hospital. What happens now? I asked, feeling suddenly exhausted. Can we recover any of the money? That depends on several factors, Patricia replied, including what actions you wish to take and the current state of your brother's business ventures. Before we discuss legal options, I'd recommend gathering more information about these transactions and their context. She paused, studying my face with genuine concern. This is undoubtedly shocking information, Ms. Bennett. Many clients in your position would immediately confront their family members or rush to legal action. I'd caution against either approach until you've had time to process this emotionally and we've developed a strategic plan. I nodded numbly, my mind already racing ahead to uncomfortable questions. Had my brother known the source of his startup capital? Had he been an active participant in this deception, or merely its beneficiary? Was his business even legitimate, Or had it been a sophisticated scheme to siphon my inheritance? And most painfully, how could I face Sunday dinner at my parents' house this weekend, knowing what I now knew? "There's one more document I think you should see," Patricia said, reaching for a final folder. "In preparing for our meeting, I conducted some due diligence on your brother's business entities." She placed a printed news article before me, dated just 3 weeks earlier, announcing the acquisition of Pinnacle Tech Solutions by a major tech corporation for $27 million. "Your brother sold his company," I whispered, the implications slowly dawning on me. "The company built with my money." Patricia nodded gravely. "If your trust fund provided the seed capital that made this business possible, there's a strong argument that you're entitled to a significant portion of those proceeds. But establishing that claim will likely require legal action against your own family members. It's not a decision to make lightly." I stared at the article, my brother's smiling face beside the corporate CEO, both holding a ceremonial oversized check. The caption described Michael Bennett as a self-made entrepreneur who built Pinnacle from the ground up through innovation and determination. Self-made. The irony would have been laughable if it weren't so devastating. Rain continued to streak down the windows of Patricia's office as I sat in stunned silence, the carefully constructed narrative of my family unraveling before my eyes. Every memory now required re-examination, every family interaction now cast in shadow. "I'd like some time to think," I finally said, gathering my composure. "But I want to understand exactly what happened, and I want what's rightfully mine." Patricia nodded approvingly. "The path forward won't be easy, but you've already taken the most important step, seeking the truth. Whatever you decide, I'll be here to guide you through it." As I left her office that afternoon, stepping into the rain without bothering to open my umbrella, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The trusting, dutiful daughter who had entered that building had died among those bank statements and legal documents. Who would emerge from this betrayal remained to be seen. But one thing was certain: I would never blindly trust anyone with my future again. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The drive from downtown Chicago to my parents' suburban home in Oakwood Hills typically took 45 minutes. That Sunday, it felt like an eternity. Every mile marker brought me closer to a confrontation I wasn't sure I was ready for. Each familiar landmark, a painful reminder of a childhood built on what now seemed like carefully constructed illusions. I pulled into the circular driveway of the Tudor-style home where I'd grown up, noting with fresh eyes the meticulous landscaping, the luxury vehicles in the garage, the recent addition that had expanded the already substantial house. Had my inheritance funded these comforts while I scrimped to make my monthly student loan payments? "Emma, sweetheart," Mom called, emerging from the front door in a cashmere sweater and designer jeans, her silver-streaked hair perfectly styled. Diane Bennett had always been the picture of suburban sophistication, president of the garden club, fixture at charity galas, and self-proclaimed best grandmother in Illinois to Michael's twin 5-year-old daughters. We were beginning to worry. Dinner's almost ready. I accepted her embrace mechanically, breathing in the familiar scent of Chanel No. 5 and home-cooked pot roast. For a fleeting moment, I considered retreating into the comfort of denial, smiling through dinner, discussing hospital politics and the twins' kindergarten achievements, preserving the family harmony as I'd always done. But Patricia Winter's words echoed in my mind. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to your financial security. "Is Michael here yet?" I asked, following Mom into the house where gleaming hardwood floors led to the gourmet kitchen my parents had renovated. "Last year, he and Vanessa had to cancel, unfortunately," Mom replied, opening the oven to check on the roast. "Some emergency with their new vacation property in Michigan. The inspection revealed foundation issues, apparently. The girls are disappointed." To miss seeing their Aunt Emma, of course. Vacation property. Another luxury purchased while my financial future had been systematically dismantled. Dad appeared from his study, half-glasses perched on his nose, gray hair still thick despite his 65 years. Robert Bennett, DMD, had built the most successful dental practice in the northern suburbs, treating generations of families and sponsoring little league teams with generous checks and personalized mouthguards. "There's my girl," he said warmly, embracing me. "How's life saving the world one sick kid at a time?" The irony of his pride in my modest career in hospital administration, while he had potentially undermined its financial foundation, wasn't lost on me. "Actually," I said, summoning my courage as we moved to the dining room table, "I had an interesting meeting this week with a financial attorney." The porcelain serving dish in Mom's hands wavered ever so slightly before she set it carefully on the table. Dad's smile remained fixed, but something flickered in his eyes. "Oh? What prompted that?" he asked, his tone deliberately casual as he took his seat at the head of the table. I waited until Mom had settled into her chair before responding. "Patricia Winters. She specializes in trust management and inheritance issues. I met her through a professional networking event." The silent exchange of glances between my parents confirmed what I already knew. This conversation would not follow the usual script of polite evasions and changing subjects that had characterized our family's approach to uncomfortable topics. "With your 30th birthday coming up, we were planning to schedule a meeting about the trust transition," Dad said smoothly. "No need to bring in outside counsel when the family attorney has managed everything perfectly well for years." The family attorney, Jeffrey Linwood, Dad's golfing buddy, whose son had dated my cousin briefly in high school. The interconnected web of loyalties that had helped conceal their actions suddenly became clear. "Patricia showed me the transaction records," I said simply, watching their expressions carefully. "All $850,000 transferred to Michael's companies, and the quarterly consulting fees paid back to you both." The facade cracked instantly. Mom's hand flew to her throat in that theatrical gesture she'd perfected through years of community theater performances. Dad's face hardened, his dental-perfect smile vanishing. "You don't understand the complexities of family financial management," he said, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he'd used when I was a teenager questioning curfews. "Those investments were made with your long-term interests in mind. Michael's business success benefits the entire family." "Including the $27 million he just received selling Pinnacle?" I asked, the number hanging in the air between us like an accusation. Mom gasped. "How did you—" "It was in the business section 3 weeks ago," I interrupted. "Congratulations to the family success story. Self-made entrepreneur wasn't—" "That the phrase they used?" "Emma, you're being unreasonable," Dad said, abandoning the pretense of dinner to lean forward intently. "We've always done what's best for both our children. Michael's ventures needed capital at crucial growth stages. The trust provided temporary liquidity with the understanding that returns would eventually flow back to you." "When?" I demanded. "When would these mysterious returns materialize? After decades of Michael living in luxury while I'm still driving a car that breaks down twice a month? After I've delayed buying a home because I'm still paying off student loans that should have been covered by my trust?" Mom's eyes welled with practiced tears. "We've always treated you both equally. It's not fair to compare." "Equally?" I laughed incredulously. "Michael's business was built with my inheritance. His house, his car, his children's private preschool, all potentially funded by money that was legally mine. Where's the equality in that?" "You chose a career in nonprofit healthcare," Dad countered, his tone dismissive. "Michael pursued entrepreneurship with its higher risks and rewards. We supported the paths you both selected. The implication was clear. I had chosen a less lucrative path, therefore deserved less financial support." The painful truth was that I had selected healthcare administration specifically because I believed I needed a stable career, having been told repeatedly by my parents that my trust fund would provide a good start, but not lifetime security. Did Michael know? I asked, the question that had haunted me since leaving Patricia's office. Did he know the money came from my trust? The uncomfortable silence that followed provided its own answer. Michael has worked incredibly hard, Mom finally said, avoiding direct confirmation. 16-hour days, constant travel, endless investor meetings. The money alone didn't build his success. But it made it possible, I pressed. Without my $850,000, would Pinnacle Tech Solutions exist at all? Dad pushed his plate away, abandoning the pretense of a normal family dinner. Emma, what exactly do you want from this conversation? To make accusations? To demand money? This isn't like you. His statement penetrated the armor of righteous anger I'd been maintaining. This wasn't like me. The dutiful daughter, the peacemaker, the one who never rocked the family boat, that was the role I'd perfected. Confrontation and financial self-advocacy were new territories. I want the truth, I said finally, and I want what's legally mine. Dad's expression darkened. Before you pursue this path, consider the consequences. Legal battles between family members get ugly quickly. They destroy relationships permanently. Is that what you want? To tear apart this family over money? The manipulation was so transparent, it almost took my breath away. My entire life, I'd been conditioned to prioritize family harmony above all else, to accept less, to expect less, to demand less, all in service of maintaining the Bennett family ideal. I think, I said carefully, that the decision to potentially destroy our family was made when you and Mom decided to misappropriate funds from my trust, when you chose Michael's ambitions over my financial security, when you betrayed the responsibility my grandparents entrusted to you. Mom began openly crying now, no longer bothering with the delicate dab of a napkin at the corner of her eye. We never meant to hurt you, Emma. Everything we did was with the best intentions. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, I quoted quietly. And apparently, so is the road to fraud. Dad stood abruptly, the legs of his chair screeching against the hardwood floor. I think we all need time to cool down. This conversation isn't productive. I remained seated, suddenly aware of the power dynamic that had shifted irreversibly. For the first time in my life, I wasn't intimidated by my father's authority or concerned about disappointing my mother. I've scheduled a follow-up meeting with Patricia on Tuesday, I informed them calmly. She's prepared to pursue legal options if necessary, but has indicated that a negotiated settlement would be preferable for all parties. Settlement? Dad repeated incredulously. You're talking as if we're adverse parties in a lawsuit, not family. Aren't we? I asked simply. The moment you decided my inheritance was yours to redistribute, didn't our relationship fundamentally change? I stood, no longer hungry for pot roast or hungry for their approval. I'll see myself out. Please let Michael know I'd like to speak with him directly. If he's not willing to contact me, my attorney will reach out to his. As I walked toward the door, Mom called after me, her voice breaking. Emma, please, don't do this. We're your parents. We love you. I paused, my hand on the doorknob, suddenly overwhelmed by grief for the family I had thought we were. I believe you do love me, in your way, but love without respect, without honesty, without ethics. What is that really worth? Driving. Away from the house that evening, I felt simultaneously hollowed out and strangely liberated. The family narrative I had accepted without question for 29 years lay in ruins, but from those ruins, something new was emerging. A version of myself who demanded truth, who recognized her own worth, who was prepared to fight for what was rightfully hers. My phone began ringing before I'd even reached the highway. First Mom, then Dad, then Mom again. I silenced each call, focusing on the road ahead. They had had decades to speak truth to me. I could grant myself a night of silence in return. When I arrived back at my apartment, I sent a brief text to my brother. We need to talk about Pinnacle Tech Solutions and my trust fund. Tomorrow, 7 p.m., the Gibson. Come alone. Then I turned my phone off completely and slept more soundly than I had in years. The Gibson was an upscale whiskey bar in Chicago's River North District, known for its intimate booths and discreet staff who prioritized privacy over eavesdropping on potentially newsworthy conversations. I arrived 30 minutes early, selecting a corner booth with a clear view of the entrance and ordering a neat scotch I didn't particularly want, but felt appropriate for the gravity of the impending discussion. My brother had responded to my text with a single word: fine. No questions, no protests, no attempts to reschedule. His immediate acquiescence suggested he'd been anticipating this conversation since the moment Pinnacle Tech Solutions acquisition had been announced publicly. At exactly 7 p.m., Michael entered the bar. Even from a distance, he cut an impressive figure, 6'2" with our father's strong jawline and our mother's expressive eyes, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. He spotted me immediately, nodding to the bartender as if they were old acquaintances before making his way to my booth. "Emma," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. Up close, I could see the strain beneath. His polished exterior, the slight shadowing under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders that his custom suit couldn't quite disguise. "Thank you for coming," I replied formally, as if we were business associates rather than siblings who had once built blanket forts together and conspired to stay up past bedtime. He signaled to a passing server. "Macallan, 18, neat." Then, turning back to me with a practiced smile, "Mom called. She was quite upset. Said you'd consulted some attorney about the trust." His attempt to position me as the villain, the daughter causing maternal distress, was so transparent, I almost laughed. Instead, I took a deliberate sip of my scotch, allowing the silence to stretch uncomfortably between us. "Patricia Winters," I finally said. "She specializes in trust litigation. She's very good." Michael's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Litigation? Emma, that's extreme. Whatever concerns you have about the trust management, we're family. We don't need lawyers to resolve family matters." "Apparently we do," I countered, "since family considerations didn't prevent $850,000 of my inheritance from being diverted to your companies." The server arrived with Michael's drink, providing him a momentary reprieve from responding. He thanked her with the easy charm that had always opened doors for him, waiting until she departed before leaning forward intently. "Look, I understand. This probably came as a shock to you. Mom and Dad should have been more transparent about the investment strategy for the trust. But you need to understand, this wasn't some nefarious scheme. It was a calculated investment decision that benefited everyone." "Everyone except me," I said pointedly. "Tell me, Michael, when exactly were you planning to repay my trust? Before or after purchasing the lake house in Michigan?" He had the grace to flinch slightly at the direct hit. The original agreement with Mom and Dad included a detailed repayment schedule once Pinnacle reached profitability thresholds. We were always going to make the trust whole, with interest. "And yet no repayments appear in any of the trust statements," I noted. "Not $1 returned despite Pinnacle showing profits for the past 2 years, according to your press releases." Michael took a long drink, gathering himself. "Business finances are complicated, Emma. Reinvestment of early profits is essential for scaling. We were building toward a significant exit that would provide returns exceeding any conservative investment approach." "We?" I repeated. "Or you? Because from where I'm sitting, you've received $27 million, while my trust remains depleted by nearly $1 million that should have funded my future." For the first time, a flash of genuine emotion, something between guilt and defensiveness, crossed his features. It wasn't like that. I worked endless hours building Pinnacle from nothing. Not from nothing, I interrupted. From my inheritance. From the money our grandparents intended for my education, my home, my security. The same grandparents who paid for your entire college education while they were still alive, who funded your first failed startup when you were 23. They took care of you directly. The trust was meant for me. Michael sat back, his corporate facade cracking slightly. Is that what this is about? Some perceived imbalance in our grandparents' generosity? They loved us equally, Emma. The trust allocation wasn't about favoritism. This isn't about their choices, I clarified. It's about yours. And Mom and Dad's. You all decided my financial future was less important than your business ambitions. That's unfair, Michael protested, though with less conviction than before. Pinnacle's success was meant to benefit the entire family. We're Bennetts. We look out for each other. Do we? I asked, pulling a document from my bag and sliding it across the table. This is the acquisition agreement for Pinnacle Tech Solutions, the publicly available version at least. Nowhere does it mention any obligation to repay investments from the Bennett Family Trust. Nowhere does it acknowledge my contribution to the company's founding capital. Michael scanned the document unnecessarily. He knew what it contained. The full acquisition agreement includes nearly 1,000 pages of attachments and schedules. Various funding sources and obligations are detailed in the confidential sections. I'd like to see those sections, I said calmly. Patricia has prepared a formal discovery request if necessary, but we'd both prefer to handle this cooperatively. My brother's executive persona reasserted itself as he recognized the seriousness of my position. What exactly are you asking for, Emma? My fair share, I replied simply. The $850,000 removed from my trust, plus the appropriate return, that money would have generated as founding capital in a $27 million exit. Patricia's preliminary calculation suggests that represents approximately 30% of the acquisition price. Michael nearly choked on his whiskey. $8 million? That's absurd. The company's valuation was based on our proprietary technology, our client relationships, our execution, not just the initial capital. None of which would have existed without my involuntary investment, I pointed out. Pinnacle would have remained just another idea without the seed funding that came from my trust. There were other investors, he countered. Angel funding, friends and family rounds. Your trust wasn't the only capital source, but it was the largest and earliest, I said, having reviewed Pinnacle's public funding disclosures. The capital that came in when the company was nothing but a concept and a business plan. The highest risk investment that enabled everything that followed. Michael's jaw tightened as he recognized the truth in my assessment. Early-stage capital carried the highest risk and, consequently, commanded the highest return multiples in successful exits. It was Venture Capital 101, a principle he himself had undoubtedly emphasized when pitching later investors. I built that company, he said finally, his voice tight with emotion. 16-hour days for 5 years, missed birthdays, postponed vacations, constant stress and uncertainty. Do you have any idea what that's like? The responsibility of having employees depending on you for their livelihoods? The pressure of meeting investor expectations quarter after quarter? No, I acknowledged honestly. Just as you have no idea what it's like to lie awake wondering how you'll afford necessary car repairs while believing your trust fund has mysteriously underperformed for years. Or what it's like to discover your own family has systematically betrayed your interests while gaslighting you about financial realities. His eyes flickered with what might have been genuine remorse before hardening again with resolve. I'm willing to make the trust whole, the original $850,000 plus reasonable interest. But $8 million is completely unreasonable. Is it? I asked. If an angel investor had provided that same $850,000 in seed funding, what would their return be today? We both know it would be significantly more than the principal plus simple interest. Michael's silence confirmed my point. In the venture capital world, early investors regularly received returns of 10x or more on successful exits, a reality he understood intimately from the other side of the equation. This isn't just about money, I continued more softly. It's about respect, about acknowledging that my financial security was sacrificed for your ambitions, without my knowledge or consent. About recognizing that the success you're celebrating was built partly on resources that weren't yours to use. For a moment, the practiced corporate mask slipped completely, revealing the brother I remembered from childhood, the one who had taught me to ride a bike, who had defended me against neighborhood bullies, who had helped me with calculus homework when I struggled in high school. I didn't know the full extent, he said quietly. Dad presented it as proper trust management, diversifying into private equity investments with family oversight. I knew the money came from the family trust, but I believed. He trailed off, perhaps realizing how hollow any justification would sound. You believed what was convenient to believe, I finished for him. That somehow using my inheritance to fund your dreams was acceptable because you're the firstborn son, the entrepreneur, the risk-taker. That your ambitions naturally took precedence over my security. Michael flinched visibly at the accuracy of my assessment. For several moments, he stared into his whiskey as if seeking answers in its amber depths. When he finally looked up, something had shifted in his expression. What if we approached this differently? He asked. Not as an adversarial negotiation, but as a belated business partnership. The truth is, Pinnacle wouldn't exist without that initial capital. You deserve not just repayment, but proper recognition as an instrumental early investor. I regarded him skeptically. What exactly are you suggesting? $5 million, he said decisively. Transferred immediately to a new trust under your sole control. No involvement from mom and dad, no strings attached. Plus a formal acknowledgement in company records of your trust's founding role in Pinnacle's creation. The offer was substantial, more than I had honestly expected him to propose, though still less than Patricia's calculated fair share. But the acknowledgement of my contribution, the recognition of my role in his success story, carried its own significant value. I'd need the agreement in writing, I said cautiously. Reviewed by Patricia before execution. Michael nodded, some tension visibly leaving his shoulders. I'll have my attorneys draft it tomorrow. Full transparency, clear terms, no hidden conditions. He extended his hand across the table, a business gesture rather than a brotherly one, but perhaps more appropriate for the relationship we now found ourselves navigating. As I reached to accept the handshake, I realized something profound had shifted within me. The meek hospital administrator who had walked into Patricia Winter's office a week ago was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone who recognized her worth, who could advocate effectively for her interests, who understood that genuine respect required more than family platitudes. To new beginnings, Michael said, raising his glass in a toast that acknowledged the transformation in our relationship. And to truth, I added, clinking my glass against his, however uncomfortable it may be. 2 days after my meeting with Michael at the Gibson, I sat in Patricia Winter's office reviewing the settlement agreement his attorneys had prepared. True to his word, the document was straightforward. $5 million to be transferred to a newly established trust under my sole control, with an accompanying statement acknowledging the Bennett family trust's founding role in Pinnacle, Tech Solutions creation. This is actually quite favorable, Patricia remarked, making final notes in the margins. I would have advised accepting anything over $4 million, given the complexities of proving precise attribution in a venture's success. Your brother must value family reconciliation more than I anticipated. I nodded absently, still processing the rapid transformation of my circumstances. In the span of 10 days, I had discovered a devastating betrayal, confronted my family, and now stood on the precipice of financial independence beyond anything I had imagined possible. The emotional whiplash left me strangely detached, as if watching someone else's life unfold. Before you sign, Patricia continued, I should mention something unusual that emerged during our verification process. Standard procedure when handling trust transitions of this magnitude is to validate the original trust documentation against county records. She pulled a folder from her desk drawer, opening it to reveal photocopied legal documents yellowed with age. These are the original trust instruments filed when your grandparents established the Bennett family trust. There's a discrepancy that requires your attention. I leaned forward, examining the document she indicated. What am I looking for? Section 7. 3, Patricia said, pointing to a paragraph dense with legal terminology. The beneficiary designation. I scanned the indicated section, the formal language initially obscuring its significance until I reached a passage that stopped my breath. All assets herein described to be held in trust for the benefit of our grandchildren, Emma Grace Bennett and Michael James Bennett, to be divided equally and distributed upon each beneficiary reaching 30 years of age. My mind struggled to process the implications. This says, both Michael and I are beneficiaries, equal beneficiaries. Patricia nodded gravely. According to the original trust documents, you and your brother were intended to receive equal shares. The trust was never meant to be exclusively yours, as your parents led you to believe. The revelation struck like a physical blow. For days, I had operated under the assumption that my trust had been plundered, my inheritance stolen. The moral clarity that had fueled my confrontations with my family suddenly wavered. I don't understand, I said, struggling to reconcile this new information with everything I had believed. If Michael was already entitled to half the trust assets, why the elaborate scheme to funnel money to his business? Why not simply tell me the truth about the arrangement? Patricia's expression remained professionally neutral, though her eyes reflected sympathy. Based on the transaction records and timing, I have a theory, though I can't confirm it without direct admission from your parents. Tell me, I insisted, needing any framework to make sense of this new reality. The first significant transfer to Pinnacle occurred in 2018, Patricia explained, coinciding with the major market downturn that affected many investment portfolios. It's possible that your parents, as trustees, had made previous investment decisions that substantially reduced the trust's value, perhaps pursuing higher-risk strategies than your grandparents had intended. The implication slowly crystallized. They lost a significant portion before any money went to Michael's company? Patricia nodded. That would explain the secrecy and the complex transfer scheme, rather than admitting financial mismanagement. Of the trust, they may have seen Michael's business as a way to potentially recover losses through high-return venture investment, essentially doubling down to fix a problem of their own creation. I sat back, the pieces rearranging themselves in my mind. This wasn't simply a case of parents favoring one child over another, as I had assumed. It was a web of deception designed to conceal their own failures as financial stewards. So Michael was entitled to half of whatever remained, I said slowly, and they used his portion, possibly some of mine as well, to fund his business without telling either of us the complete truth. That appears to be the most logical explanation, Patricia confirmed. Your brother likely knew he was a beneficiary but may not have known about prior losses, or that funds beyond his rightful portion were being directed to his company. A new question formed, one that felt suddenly crucial. If the original trust was established with $2 million and should have been divided equally between us, what would each half be worth today if properly managed? Patricia had anticipated this question. She slid a printout across her desk. A projection model comparing conservative growth scenarios against standard index performance. Approximately $1.8 to $2 million each, she said quietly, assuming prudent management and average market returns since your grandparents established the trust. The mathematics of betrayal were suddenly stark. Instead of $1.8 million, I had been poised to receive whatever remained after years of mismanagement and unauthorized transfers. Meanwhile, Michael had already effectively received his portion through business funding, culminating in the $27 million acquisition that would never have been possible without the trust's initial investment. A strange calm settled over me as I processed this final piece of information. What does this mean for the settlement agreement? Patricia considered the question carefully. Legally, it complicates matters. Your brother's offer of $5 million actually exceeds what would have been your rightful portion of a properly managed trust. However, it doesn't address the issue of your parents' potential breach of fiduciary duty, nor the question of whether your portion subsidized Michael's business beyond his rightful share. She paused, studying my expression. This is no longer solely a financial decision, Ms. Bennett. It's about what resolution will allow you to move forward. I nodded, understanding the deeper question she was posing. What outcome would give me not just financial compensation, but the peace to rebuild my life and relationships in the aftermath of these revelations? I need to speak with all of them, I said finally, together, with all the facts on the table. Patricia raised an eyebrow. Are you sure that's wise? Family confrontations involving financial matters often become volatile, especially with new information that might shift perceived wrongdoing. It's necessary, I insisted. Not just for me, but for all of us. This has never been just about the money. The following Saturday found the entire Bennett family assembled in my small apartment, the neutral territory I had selected for this crucial conversation. My parents arrived first, visibly uncomfortable in the modest surroundings they had rarely visited. Michael came 20 minutes later, maintaining the professionally detached demeanor we had established at the Gibson. I had prepared meticulously for this meeting, arranging documents chronologically on my dining table and rehearsing opening statements with Patricia, who had offered to attend but whom I had declined. This needed to be family only. No attorneys, no external witnesses to whatever painful truths might emerge. Thank you all for coming, I began formally, once everyone had refused offers of coffee or water. The tension in the room was palpable, each family member armored with their respective justifications and grievances. I've asked you here because I've discovered information that changes how I understand our situation. I slid copies of the original trust document across the table, the beneficiary clause highlighted in yellow. I now know that the trust was always intended to be shared equally between Michael and me. That changes the nature of what happened, but doesn't erase the deception. Mom's hand flew to her mouth, while Dad's expression hardened defensively. Michael looked genuinely surprised, examining the document with the careful attention he might give a contract negotiation. What I need to understand, I continued, is why the elaborate deception? Why not simply tell me the truth about the trust structure and purpose? The silence stretched uncomfortably until Dad finally spoke, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. It was never supposed to unfold this way. We made investment decisions in 2008 that seemed prudent at the time, diversifying into what we believed were stable real estate vehicles. When the market collapsed, the trust lost nearly 60% of its value. Mom picked up the narrative, unable to meet my eyes. We were ashamed. Your grandparents had entrusted their life's work to our management, and we had failed spectacularly. We couldn't bear to tell either of you that we'd diminished your inheritance through poor judgment. So when I needed startup capital for Pinnacle, Michael interjected, the pieces clearly falling into place for him as well. You saw it as a chance to recoup the losses without admitting the truth. Dad nodded grimly. We believed in your business model. It seemed like the perfect solution. Invest what remained in a venture with potential for exponential returns. If successful, both you and Emma would ultimately receive more than if we'd simply divided what was left. But you never told me about Emma's stake, Michael said, his corporate facade cracking to reveal genuine distress. You let me believe I was using only my rightful portion of the trust. And you never told me about any of it, I added quietly. Not the losses, not the equal beneficiary status, not the investment strategy. You left me believing in a financial safety net that had been significantly compromised, then systematically depleted. The truth hung heavy in my small living room. A familial failure more complex than the simple favoritism narrative I had constructed. My parents hadn't merely favored Michael's ventures, they had desperately attempted to conceal their own financial mismanagement through increasingly risky decisions. When Pinnacle started showing promise, Dad continued reluctantly, we should have come clean. But the longer the deception continued, the harder it became to unravel. We kept telling ourselves that the end would justify the means, that a successful exit would provide both of you with more than the original trust ever could. At my expense and without my consent, I pointed out, while I delayed major life decisions believing my financial foundation was solid but modest. We never meant to hurt you, Emma, Mom said, tears streaming unchecked down her face. We thought we were protecting you from disappointment while working toward a better outcome. By lying, I said flatly, for years. An uncomfortable silence settled over the room as each person wrestled with their role in the situation. I had imagined this confrontation countless times since discovering the trust discrepancies, but the reality was both more painful and more illuminating than I had anticipated. Michael finally broke the silence. I've offered Emma $5 million from the acquisition proceeds. The paperwork is ready for signature. That's more than fair, Dad said quickly, relief evident in his voice. More than your original share would have been worth. It's not about fair market value, Michael responded before I could speak. It's about acknowledging that my success was built partly on Emma's involuntary investment and her lost opportunities during these years. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a flicker of genuine connection with my brother, a recognition that he too had been manipulated, albeit with different consequences. The settlement is generous, I acknowledged. But this conversation was never just about financial resolution. It was about truth, about understanding why my own family conspired to keep me ignorant about matters directly affecting my future. I looked at each of them in turn, the parents who had raised me to value honesty, yet had systematically deceived me, the brother who had benefited from that deception, yet now sought to make amends. What happens next? I said with quiet determination will depend on one thing, complete transparency moving forward. No more convenient omissions, no more paternalistic protection from financial realities, no more decisions about my life made without my knowledge or consent. The path ahead remained uncertain, the family bonds severely tested by revelations that could not be unlearned. But as we sat together in my modest apartment, surrounded by documentation of both betrayal and attempted reconciliation, I recognized that true closure would require more than monetary settlement. It would demand a fundamental restructuring of how the Bennett family operated, a new paradigm based on mutual respect rather than hierarchical control, on earned trust rather than assumed authority. Whether we could achieve that transformation remained to be seen. But for the first time, we were at least acknowledging the need to try. In the weeks following our family confrontation, silence descended upon the Bennetts. The settlement agreement sat unsigned on my kitchen counter as I wrestled with questions that transcended financial considerations. $5 million would transform my material circumstances overnight, but would it heal the breach of trust that had fractured our family? Could monetary compensation, however substantial, Restore faith in relationships built on decades of deception? My apartment had never felt smaller than during this period of contemplation. Each evening after returning from the hospital, I would brew tea in the chipped mug from my college days and sit beside my window overlooking the city, watching strangers navigate their lives with enviable certainty while my own path remained obscured. On the 15th day of this self-imposed isolation, my phone chimed with a text from an unexpected source. "Coffee tomorrow? Just us. Michael." We met at a quiet cafe in Wicker Park, far from our usual family haunts and the corporate settings that had framed our recent interactions. Michael arrived without his usual executive armor, dressed in jeans and a simple button-down, hair slightly disheveled as it had been during his early startup days before success demanded a more polished image. "Thank you for coming," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. The formality that had characterized our meeting at the Gibson was notably absent, replaced by a vulnerability I hadn't seen in my brother since childhood. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since our family meeting." "So have I," I admitted, wrapping my hands around the warmth of my mug. "The settlement agreement is generous, but I'm struggling with what comes after. Whether acceptance implies forgiveness or simply financial resolution." Michael nodded, understanding the deeper question. "That's actually why I wanted to meet without Mom and Dad present. There's something I need to tell you. Something I've realized about myself through all this." He paused, gathering courage in a way that seemed antithetical to the confident entrepreneur who had built a multi-million-dollar company. "I've always defined myself by achievement. Grades, athletic trophies, business milestones. External validation became my measure of worth. When Pinnacle started gaining traction, that validation expanded exponentially. Investors praising my vision, industry publications featuring our growth, acquisition offers validating everything I'd built. You earned those accomplishments," I said quietly, uncertain where his confession was leading. "Did I?" he countered. "Or was I standing on a foundation I hadn't fully acknowledged? The truth is, Emma, I've spent years cultivating a carefully curated narrative of the self-made entrepreneur who built something from nothing through sheer determination and brilliance. That narrative never included the advantages I received, not just the capital from the trust, but years of unearned privileges and family resources channeled in my direction. The admission hung between us, remarkable in its honesty. This wasn't the defensive posturing of our previous conversations, but a genuine reckoning with uncomfortable truths. "When you confronted me at the Gibson," Michael continued, "my immediate instinct was damage control, limit liability, preserve the narrative, protect the achievement. But these past weeks have forced me to confront questions I've spent my career avoiding. Who would I be without the mythology I've constructed around my success? What part of my achievement is truly mine, and what part belongs to circumstances and opportunities others provided?" I studied my brother's face, seeing beyond the polished facade to the uncertainty beneath, the same uncertainty that had characterized my own reflection recently. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because the settlement agreement isn't enough," he said simply. $5 million doesn't address the fundamental imbalance that's defined our relationship since childhood. It doesn't acknowledge the pattern that positioned my ambitions as inherently more valuable than your stability." He reached into his messenger bag, extracting a new document and sliding it across the table. "This is an amended agreement. The financial terms remain the same, but I've added something I think matters more." I examined the document cautiously, scanning for legal traps or hidden conditions. What I found instead was unexpected. A formal partnership agreement naming me as a founding investor in Michael's new venture capital firm, Bennett Innovation Partners. "You're launching a VC firm?" I asked, looking up in surprise. "With the proceeds from the Pinnacle acquisition," he confirmed. "I'm establishing a fund focused on healthcare technology innovations, combining my tech background with your healthcare expertise. The firm will allocate 30% of its carried interest to you as a founding partner, with no capital contribution required. Your hospital administration experience gives you insight into medical systems that most tech investors lack entirely. I stared at the document, struggling to process this unexpected development. You want me as a partner? After everything that's happened? Because of everything that's happened, Michael corrected. This isn't charity or guilt money, Emma. This is recognition that you bring valuable perspective to the table, perspective that could help identify truly transformative healthcare technologies, rather than flashy solutions that fail in real, clinical settings. The proposition was so unexpected that I found myself momentarily speechless. For years, I had existed in Michael's shadow, the sensible sister with the modest career, while he commanded headlines with entrepreneurial brilliance. Now he was suggesting a partnership of equals, a collaboration that valued my professional experience alongside his technical expertise. I don't know anything about venture capital, I said cautiously. And I don't know anything about hospital administration, he countered. That's the point. Separately, we each have significant blind spots. Together, we might build something neither of us could create alone. For the first time since discovering the trust discrepancies, I felt something beyond anger or resignation, a cautious curiosity about possibilities I had never previously considered. Why healthcare technology specifically? I asked, my administrator's mind already calculating potential synergies between our skill sets. Because it matters, Michael said with unexpected passion. Pinnacle built enterprise software that ultimately helped corporations increase efficiency and reduce costs, valuable work, but not transformative to human lives. Healthcare technology has the potential to fundamentally improve patient outcomes, reduce suffering, expand access to underserved populations. He leaned forward, animation replacing the vulnerability that had characterized his earlier confession. Imagine identifying and funding the technologies that transform healthcare delivery in meaningful ways, not just incremental efficiency improvements, but fundamental innovations in diagnosis, treatment, accessibility. Your frontline experience could help separate truly valuable solutions from well-packaged tech that fails in actual clinical settings. The vision he outlined was compelling, a purpose-driven application of both our strengths toward outcomes that transcended mere profit. Yet caution born from recent betrayals tempered my enthusiasm. And Mom and Dad? I asked. What role would they play in this new venture? None, Michael stated firmly. This partnership exists entirely outside their influence or involvement. They've demonstrated they can't be trusted with transparent financial management. Their input would undermine the very foundation of trust we're trying to rebuild. The decisive nature of his response suggested he had reached conclusions similar to my own about our parents' role moving forward. Limited, cautious engagement that acknowledged the irreparable breach of trust while allowing for potential. Healing over time. I need time to consider this, I said finally. The financial settlement alone is significant enough to warrant careful thought. This partnership proposal adds another dimension entirely. Michael nodded, seemingly relieved I hadn't dismissed the idea outright. Take whatever time you need. This isn't a limited time offer. It's a recognition of value that has always been there, whether acknowledged or not. As we parted outside the cafe, an unexpected moment of connection passed between us. Not the rehearsed affection of family gatherings or the strained civility of recent negotiations, but something more genuine. A mutual recognition of how, fundamentally, our relationship had transformed through confronting difficult truths. The following evening, I received an unexpected email from Riverstone Children's Hospital, where I'd worked for the past 6 years. The subject line read simply, Strategic Innovation Initiative. Discussion request. The message from Catherine Reeves, the hospital's chief operating officer, was brief but intriguing. Emma, I've been approached by a new healthcare technology investment firm interested in partnering with Riverstone on evaluating emerging technologies for pediatric care delivery. They've specifically requested your involvement given your unique position bridging administrative and patient care perspectives. Would you be available to discuss a potential leadership role in this initiative? The opportunity could involve partial secondment from your current duties. Attached was a preliminary overview of a proposed collaboration between Riverstone Children's Hospital and Bennett Innovation Partners. I stared at my screen, momentarily stunned by Michael's initiative. Without pressuring me directly, he had created a pathway that recognized my professional value within my existing organization, leveraging his resources not to extract me from my chosen career, but to elevate my position within it. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt something beyond anger or resignation, a cautious optimism about possibilities I had never previously imagined for myself. The collaboration Michael proposed wouldn't erase the past deceptions, but it offered something arguably more valuable: a future built on mutual respect and recognition of each other's strengths. 2 days later, I signed both agreements: the financial settlement resolving past inequities and the partnership agreement outlining future collaboration. Neither document mentioned forgiveness or made promises about emotional reconciliation. Those elements would require time, consistent truth-telling, and rebuilt trust that no legal language could enforce. What the agreements did establish was a framework for moving forward with clear expectations and transparent terms, a foundation far stronger than the illusions that had previously defined our family dynamics. As I affixed my signature to the final page, I realized that the most valuable asset reclaimed through this painful process wasn't financial at all. It was the recognition of my own worth, not as defined by family hierarchy or comparative achievement, but as an intrinsic quality I carried regardless of external validation. The money mattered. $5 million would transform my material circumstances significantly. But the realization that I possessed the strength to confront deception, the wisdom to recognize value beyond financial metrics, and the courage to establish new terms for relationships that had failed me, these discoveries represented wealth of far greater significance. The path forward remained uncertain. Healing family fractures would require more than signed agreements and business partnerships. But for the first time in my adult life, I stood on ground that felt solidly my own, defined not by inheritance or family expectations, but by choices made with clear-eyed recognition of my own worth. Whatever came next, I would face it not as the dutiful daughter or the overshadowed sister, but as Emma Bennett, a woman who had discovered through betrayal the strength that had always existed within her, waiting to be claimed. 6 months after signing the settlement and partnership agreements, I stood in the newly renovated East Wing of Riverstone Children's Hospital, watching as families navigated the space that had been transformed from a sterile medical environment into something that felt almost magical. Interactive wall displays responded to children's movements, projecting gentle underwater scenes that shifted and evolved as young patients explored the waiting area. Privacy pods designed like whimsical treehouses offered families spaces for quiet conversations with medical staff, replacing the exposed consultation stations that had previously afforded little dignity during difficult discussions. The satisfaction scores have increased 68% since implementation, Dr. Irene Chen, Riverstone's Chief of Pediatric Services, remarked as she joined me by the observation window. More importantly, anxiety markers in pre-treatment assessments have decreased significantly. Children who are less frightened are easier to treat, require less sedation, and generally experience better outcomes. I nodded, a quiet pride warming my chest. This transformation represented the first major initiative of the strategic innovation partnership between Riverstone and Bennett Innovation Partners. When McKinley Design Labs had presented their child-centered medical environment concept, I had immediately recognized its potential to address the psychological barriers that often complicated pediatric care. Michael had seen the technological infrastructure challenges and market potential. Together, we had structured an investment and implementation approach that made the vision viable. Your promotion was long overdue, Dr. Chen continued, referencing my recent advancement to Executive Director of Innovation and Patient Experience, a position created specifically to bridge clinical operations with emerging technologies. Though I admit, we were all surprised by the revelation of your connection to Bennett Innovation. You never mentioned your brother was that Michael Bennett. It's a relatively new professional collaboration, I explained carefully, still navigating the complex narrative of our family's financial history. We discovered our skill sets are surprisingly complementary. What I didn't explain was how fundamentally my life had transformed in the month since the settlement. The $5 million had been transferred to a trust under my sole control, managed by a fiduciary team Patricia had helped me assemble. My student loans were paid off. I had purchased a comfortable condominium in Lincoln Park with space for a home office. Most importantly, I had established financial boundaries that ensured I would never again be vulnerable to others' manipulation or mismanagement. But the material changes, significant as they were, paled in comparison to the internal transformation. The woman who had once accepted family narratives without question now approached every situation with clear-eyed assessment. The administrator who had once hesitated to challenge established systems now confidently advocated for innovations that served patients' actual needs rather than institutional conventions. My phone vibrated with a calendar alert, a reminder of my 3 p.m. meeting with potential investors for NeuroSync, a promising neural interface technology designed to help nonverbal children communicate more effectively. The meeting would be held at Bennett Innovation's downtown offices, where I maintained a part-time presence while continuing my expanded role at Riverstone. I need to head out, I told Dr. Chen, gathering my materials. The demonstration for the board is scheduled for next Thursday if everything aligns with the investors. The Uber ride downtown provided 15 minutes of reflection, a brief interlude in days now filled with purposeful activity. Sometimes I still marveled at how drastically my life had pivoted since that rainy Tuesday in Patricia Winter's office. The betrayal that had initially felt devastating had ultimately become catalytic, forcing reconsideration of patterns and assumptions I might otherwise have maintained indefinitely. Bennett Innovation Partners occupied the 28th floor of a gleaming tower in Chicago's business district, a space designed to balance professional sophistication with creative energy. Unlike the sterile minimalism favored by many financial firms, Michael had created an environment that reflected our focus on healthcare innovation. Living green walls purified the air, carefully calibrated lighting mimicked natural daylight. Patterns and meeting spaces incorporated design elements proven to enhance collaborative thinking. As I entered the main conference room, Michael was already there, engaged in animated conversation with Dr. Lydia Patel, NeuroSync's brilliant founder. At 42, Dr. Patel had spent her career at the intersection of neuroscience and computer interface design, developing technologies that helped bridge communication gaps for individuals with various neurological conditions. "Emma, perfect timing," Michael said, looking up with genuine warmth. The awkward tension that had characterized our early professional interactions had gradually evolved into something approaching true partnership. Dr. Patel was just demonstrating the latest refinements to the pediatric headset design. On the table sat what appeared to be a colorful, lightweight headband, embedded with sensors nearly invisible within its playful pattern, a significant improvement over the clinical-looking prototype I had evaluated 3 months earlier. "We incorporated the feedback from your pediatric focus groups," Dr. Patel explained. "Children consistently reported the medical aesthetic created anxiety, so we've completely redesigned the external elements while maintaining full functionality." "The technological advancements are impressive," Michael added. But Emma's insight about perception barriers in pediatric applications was what unlocked the design breakthrough. Technical excellence means nothing if children refuse to wear the device. The acknowledgement of my contribution came naturally, without the performative quality that had characterized some of Michael's early attempts to demonstrate our equal partnership. Over months of collaboration, genuine respect had gradually replaced the guilt-driven overcompensation of our initial arrangement. The meeting proceeded with detailed discussion of clinical trial protocols, regulatory pathways, and potential hospital system partnerships. My role focused primarily on implementation challenges within healthcare settings, while Michael addressed investment structuring and commercialization strategy. Dr. Patel's technical expertise completed the triangulation, creating a comprehensive approach to bringing her innovation to the children who needed it most. 2 hours later, as we concluded with clear next steps and timeline commitments, I experienced a moment of profound clarity about the transformation of my professional identity. I was no longer simply an administrator managing existing systems, but an active architect of healthcare innovation, leveraging both my hospital experience and newly developed investment acumen to bridge worlds that rarely communicated effectively. "Dinner tonight?" Michael asked as Dr. Patel departed with our technical team for additional software reviews. "I'd like your perspective on the palliative care telehealth platform we're evaluating. Plus, there's a family matter we should discuss." The phrase family matter still triggered a moment of wariness, a protective instinct developed through painful experience. "What kind of family matter?" I asked, maintaining the directness that now characterized all my family interactions. "Mom and Dad have asked to meet with us," Michael said, his tone carefully neutral. "They've suggested dinner next Sunday to discuss moving forward as a family." In the month since our confrontation, my relationship with our parents had existed in a state of careful detachment. Surface-level communication continued, birthday calls, occasional text messages, but the previous pretense of familial closeness had been replaced by polite distance. They had not been included in any aspect of Bennett Innovation Partners, nor consulted on my career developments or financial decisions. "What are your thoughts?" I asked, genuinely curious about Michael's perspective. Our individual healing processes had progressed at different rates, shaped by our unique positions within the family dynamic. He considered the question thoughtfully before responding. "I'm open to hearing them out, but with clear boundaries. The trust issues can't be resolved through a single conversation or generous gesture. Whatever moving forward means, it can't return to previous patterns." His response reflected the parallel journeys we had undertaken, separate but increasingly aligned in our understanding of healthy family dynamics. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "Let's discuss it over dinner." We met that evening at Everly, a farm-to-table restaurant in West Loop known for its innovative approach to comfort food classics. The space struck a balance between sophistication and accessibility, much like the relationship Michael and I were cautiously constructing from the ruins of our previous family dynamic. "I've been reflecting on the neurosync opportunity," Michael said after we had ordered. "Dr. Patel's technology has transformative potential, but what struck me most was watching you during the meeting." "What do you mean?" I asked, genuinely curious. "You've changed," he observed, "not just professionally, but fundamentally. The sister I grew up with was always careful, always accommodating, seeking approval rather than asserting direction. Today you challenged assumptions, redirected approaches, advocated powerfully for the patient perspective. You led without apology or self-doubt." His observation caught me off guard. I had been so focused on navigating external changes that I had barely registered the internal transformation he described. "I suppose crisis either diminishes you or forces growth," I said after a moment's reflection. Discovering the truth about the trust was devastating, but it also severed the patterns that had limited me. Once I understood how fundamentally I had been misled by people I trusted implicitly, all other uncertainties seemed less threatening by comparison. Michael nodded, understanding visible in his expression. "For me, It forced recognition of how much my success narrative relied on minimizing the advantages I received. The self-made mythology required ignoring both the capital from the trust and the psychological advantages of being positioned as the family's priority investment. The waiter arrived with our meals, providing a momentary pause in our conversation. When he departed, Michael continued with unexpected vulnerability. "I've been seeing a therapist," he admitted. "Working through patterns I never previously examined, the performance orientation, the achievement addiction, the constant need for external validation. I'm beginning to understand how I participated in family dynamics that ultimately harmed both of us, though in different ways." This disclosure represented significant growth from the brother who had once embodied our family's aversion to psychological introspection, viewing therapy as an indulgence for those lacking mental discipline. "That's courageous," I acknowledged. Sincerely. It's easier to focus exclusively on their betrayal without examining the patterns we internalized and perpetuated. Our conversation shifted to the palliative care telehealth platform Michael had mentioned earlier, a technology enabling homebound children with terminal conditions to maintain meaningful connection with their care communities through immersive, virtual interfaces. The discussion reflected our evolving professional partnership, each contributing distinct perspectives toward shared objectives. Only as we finished our meals did we return to the question of our parents' dinner invitation. "I'm willing to meet with them," I said carefully, "but with conditions. Complete transparency about any remaining financial matters, no minimizing or rewriting the breach of trust, and absolutely no pressure to resume previous relationship patterns out of family obligation." Michael nodded in agreement. I'd add, "One more condition. Any future relationship must be built on mutual respect for our adult autonomy, not parental authority or familial hierarchy." As we left the restaurant that evening, I realized how profoundly the landscape of my life had transformed in 6 short months. The painful revelation that had initially seemed like an ending had instead catalyzed a beginning, not just financially, through the settlement, but in my fundamental understanding of my own capabilities and worth. More remarkable still was the evolving relationship with my brother. The settlement could have represented a final transaction, financial compensation concluding our connection, but instead had become the foundation for something neither of us had anticipated, a partnership of equals built on genuine respect rather than obligatory family affection. The future remained uncertain in many respects. The dinner with our parents might open pathways to healthier family dynamics or confirm the necessity of permanent boundaries. The professional collaboration with Michael might evolve into a lasting partnership or eventually reach natural conclusion as our respective interests diverged. But the fundamental transformation remained. I now moved through the world not as someone defined by family roles or limited by others' narratives, but as a woman who had discovered her own power through the very experience designed to diminish it. The betrayal had been real, the hurt genuine. But from that painful soil had grown something unexpected and profound. Not just financial independence, but the far more valuable freedom of self-determination and clear-eyed purpose. Sunday. Dinner with my parents loomed like an approaching storm front, visible on the horizon, impossible to avoid, its potential impact uncertain. Michael and I had agreed to meet beforehand at my condominium, presenting a united front rather than allowing our parents to navigate our individual boundaries separately as they had so often done in the past. "You've done well for yourself," Michael remarked, touring my newly furnished living space with genuine appreciation. The open-concept design featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lincoln Park, contemporary furnishings in muted tones, and carefully selected artwork from local Chicago artists. "This place suits you. Elegant without being ostentatious, thoughtful rather than trendy. It's the first space that's truly felt like an expression of me rather than a temporary accommodation," I acknowledged, realizing the truth of this statement as I spoke it. My previous apartment had been furnished primarily with practicality in mind, serviceable pieces selected for affordability rather than aesthetic preference. This home represented conscious choices made without financial constraint or external expectations. "Ready for this?" Michael asked as the clock approached 6, our designated departure time for the reservation at Maison Laurent, an upscale French restaurant our mother had selected for this reunion attempt. "As ready as possible," I replied, gathering my purse and keys. I've prepared for every scenario from tearful reconciliation to defensive hostility. My therapist suggested focusing on clear boundaries rather than anticipated outcomes, Michael offered as we rode the elevator to the parking garage. Apparently, I have a problematic tendency to script interactions before they occur, then become disproportionately frustrated when people deviate from my mental screenplay. I laughed with unexpected lightness. That might be the most self-aware observation you've ever made. Remember when you mapped out the entire family vacation to Florida on a color-coded spreadsheet, then nearly had a meltdown when tropical weather patterns failed to accommodate your schedule? "I was 15, he protested good-naturedly. And those dolphin encounters were non-refundable. This easy exchange represented significant progress in our sibling relationship. The ability to reference shared history with humor rather than resentment, to acknowledge flaws without weaponizing them. The foundation we had built through professional collaboration was gradually extending into personal connection, though carefully and with appropriate boundaries. Maison Laurent occupied a converted townhouse in Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood, its understated exterior concealing a sumptuous interior of velvet banquettes and crystal chandeliers. Our parents had already been seated at a corner table when we arrived, their postures betraying nervous anticipation. Mom had styled her silver hair in an elegant updo that emphasized her still youthful features, while Dad's tailored suit and fresh haircut suggested special effort for this occasion. "Emma, Michael." Mom rose to embrace us, then hesitated, clearly uncertain whether physical affection would be welcomed. The moment crystallized how fundamentally our family dynamic had shifted, the automatic patterns disrupted, leaving awkward consciousness in their place. We settled into our seats with exchanges of surface pleasantries about traffic and weather that barely masked the underlying tension. The waiter's arrival with menus provided temporary reprieve from the need for meaningful conversation. After ordering, an uncomfortable silence descended until Dad finally addressed it directly. "Your mother and I appreciate you both agreeing to meet with us. We've done a lot of soul-searching these past months about our actions and the trust we broke." "We've missed you both terribly," Mom added, emotion evident in her voice. "Sunday dinners haven't been the same. The family feels incomplete." The familiar appeal to family unity might once have swayed me, activating the deep-rooted programming to prioritize harmony over honesty. Now I recognized it as the opening gambit in a well-established pattern, emotional leverage designed to bypass accountability. "Before we discuss moving forward," I said firmly, "we need acknowledgement of specifically what happened and why. Not generalized references to mistakes or broken trust, but clear recognition of the actions taken and the thinking behind them." Michael nodded in support. Complete transparency is the only foundation for any potential relationship moving forward. Our parents exchanged glances, a silent communication developed through 4 decades of marriage. Dad straightened his shoulders and adopted the forthright manner that had served him well throughout his dental practice. "We made a series of catastrophic investment decisions with the trust in 2008, he began. "Pursuing higher returns, we placed significant assets in what we believed were stable real estate ventures. When the market collapsed, those investments lost nearly 60% of their value almost overnight. We were devastated," Mom continued. "Your grandparents had built that trust through decades of hard work, and our poor judgment had diminished it dramatically. The shame was overwhelming." "So you decided to conceal the losses," Michael prompted, maintaining a neutral tone that neither accused nor absolved. Dad nodded grimly. We convinced ourselves it was temporary, that with proper management, we could recover the losses before either of you needed to know. When Michael's first startup showed promise, we saw an opportunity to recoup everything through higher risk, higher return venture investment. But that doesn't explain the systematic deception about my status as a beneficiary, I pointed out. Why not simply tell me the truth about the trust's structure and purpose from the beginning? Mom's expression reflected genuine confusion. We did tell you, Emma, many times throughout your childhood and teenage years. We discussed how your grandparents had established equal shares for both you and Michael. This assertion collided with my clear memories of being told the trust was specifically for my education and future security, while Michael had received direct support during our grandparents' lifetime. That's not true, I countered firmly. I was consistently led to believe the trust was established solely for me, as balance for Michael receiving direct financial support from our grandparents while they were alive. The genuine bewilderment on both my parents' faces suggested something more complex than deliberate deception. Emma, Dad said carefully, we absolutely discussed the equal division with you multiple times. I distinctly remember explaining the structure when you were applying to colleges, clarifying that your portion would cover educational expenses while the remainder would be preserved for your future. And I remember explaining how your grandparents had helped Michael with his undergraduate expenses directly, which is why he wasn't drawing from the Trust for Education, Mom added. But the principal was always intended to be divided equally when you both turned 30. The disconnect between these conflicting recollections hung in the air between us. Either my parents were lying now about previous disclosures, or something more disturbing had occurred. Selective retention that had shaped our family narrative according to unconscious biases and preferences. Is it possible, Michael suggested cautiously, that explanations about the trust were presented differently to each of us? That certain details were emphasized with Emma while others were highlighted with me? Dad considered this thoughtfully. We certainly discussed financial matters differently based on your individual interests and questions. Michael always wanted granular details about investment structures and growth strategies. Emma typically focused on practical applications, how the trust would support her education and future plans. But we never deliberately misled either of you about the fundamental structure, Mom insisted. That would have served no purpose. A memory suddenly surfaced. Myself at 17, sitting at the kitchen table with college brochures spread before me. Mom explaining that my trust fund would cover tuition at any of my selected schools. Not your portion of the trust, or your share of the family trust, but your trust fund, language that subtly reinforced ownership and exclusivity. I think, I said slowly, that years of casual references to Emma's trust fund and Michael's grandparent support gradually constructed separate narratives that became our accepted reality. Not through deliberate deception, but through imprecise language that calcified into distinct understandings. The theory aligned with other aspects of our family dynamic, the subtle linguistic frameworks that had positioned Michael as the ambitious risk-taker and me as the sensible planner, narratives that had shaped our self-perception and life choices far more profoundly than any explicit direction. That's entirely possible, Dad acknowledged, though it doesn't excuse our mismanagement of the assets or the decision to funnel remaining funds into Michael's ventures without proper disclosure to either of you. Or the quarterly kickbacks structured as consulting fees, Michael added, pointedly. Mom flinched visibly at this direct reference. Those payments were compensation for actual advisory work your father provided to Pinnacle. The timing and structure were admittedly problematic, but the services were genuine. Let's be completely honest, Dad interjected with unexpected forthrightness. While I did provide some consulting input, those payments were primarily designed to supplement our retirement income after the market downturn decimated our personal investments alongside the trust assets. It was self-serving and improper, regardless of how we rationalized it at the time. This unvarnished admission represented a significant departure from my father's typical approach to uncomfortable truths. Throughout my childhood, he had expertly deployed euphemism and misdirection to navigate difficult topics. Financial challenges described as temporary cash flow adjustments, ethical compromises framed as strategic necessity. "What's changed?" I asked directly. "6 months ago, you were both defending your actions as appropriate trust management. Now you're acknowledging impropriety and self-interest. What prompted this evolution?" Again, that silent exchange of glances before Mom answered with uncharacteristic vulnerability. "Therapy, intensive couples counseling with a financial therapy specialist. After you both confronted us with the consequences of our actions, we were forced to examine patterns we'd maintained for decades. Our therapist helped us recognize how we'd constructed elaborate justifications for decisions that were fundamentally self-protective," Dad continued. "The trust mismanagement wasn't just about poor investment choices. It was about our inability to acknowledge failure and our willingness to compromise ethical boundaries to maintain appearances." This disclosure stunned me momentarily into silence. My parents seeking therapy represented a fundamental shift in their approach to life's challenges. They had always projected absolute confidence in their decisions, treating psychological introspection as unnecessary for those with proper discipline and moral clarity. "That couldn't have been easy for either of you," Michael acknowledged, genuine respect evident in his tone. "It's been excruciating," Mom admitted. "Dismantling 40 years of relationship patterns and facing uncomfortable truths about ourselves as partners, parents, and financial stewards, but also clarifying in ways we never expected." Our dinner arrived, providing a natural pause in this unexpectedly authentic conversation. As we began our meals, I noticed subtle changes in my parents' interaction. Mom expressing opinions without checking Dad's reaction first, Dad listening attentively rather than directing the conversation. Small shifts that suggested deeper transformations in their relationship dynamic. "We understand that trust, once broken, isn't easily restored," Dad said as we finished our entrees. "We're not asking for immediate forgiveness or pretending that shared meals can erase the harm caused by our actions. What we are asking for," Mom continued, "is the opportunity to build new relationships with you both. Relationships based on honesty, mutual respect, and recognition of your complete autonomy as adults." Their request was modest, yet profound, acknowledging that previous family patterns could not be resurrected while expressing genuine desire for connection under fundamentally different terms. "I appreciate the work you've both clearly done," I said carefully, "and I'm open to exploring what a healthier relationship might look like moving forward. But slowly, with clear boundaries, and without expectation that things will ever return to what they were before." Michael nodded in agreement. "Trust will need to be rebuilt incrementally, through consistent actions rather than single conversations or promises." As we concluded the evening with tentative plans for another dinner the following month, I realized that the revelation of financial betrayal had ultimately catalyzed transformation for our entire family system, not just for Michael and me, but for our parents as well. The painful exposure of long-maintained deceptions had stripped away pretenses, creating space for potential authenticity where carefully constructed facades had previously prevailed. The future remained uncertain, the path toward reconciliation neither guaranteed nor clear. But possibility existed where finality had once seemed inevitable. The possibility of relationships built on genuine understanding rather than prescribed roles, on earned trust rather than obligatory loyalty. As Michael and I walked toward his car after dinner, a light snow began falling, the first of the season dusting Chicago's elegant streetscapes with crystalline potential. "That went differently than I expected," he admitted. "I was prepared for defensiveness or emotional manipulation, not actual accountability." "People can surprise you," I replied. watching snowflakes gather on my wool coat. Sometimes even the most entrenched patterns can shift when the alternatives become unsustainable. The observation applied not just to our parents, but to the transformation each of us had undergone since the trust revelation, the shattering of established identities creating space for more authentic versions to emerge. From that painful breaking had come possibilities none of us could have anticipated 6 months earlier. Professional partnership between Michael and me, potential healing within our parents' marriage, and the tentative foundation for family. Relationships built on truth rather than comfortable illusions. The betrayal had been real, the hurt, genuine. But through confronting it directly rather than retreating into denial or acceptance, we had each found pathways to growth that might otherwise have remained forever closed. Proof that sometimes, our greatest challenges can become, unexpectedly, our most profound opportunities for transformation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.